Hey, so we're back with the next installment, and we're going to be talking about the vegetation of the Mafinga Mountains today. So basically, as a kind of a brief breakdown, I think I'm going to kind of go ahead and read from Dennis Fanshaw's publication on the vegetation of the Mafingas, as it gives kind of a nice little overall feel to it. And he starts by saying, the highest parts of the mountain are predominantly covered by montane grassland, smooth in a few places but rocky in most. Hill miombo woodland covers most slopes, sometimes up to the crests. Some ridges are almost completely bare or with a sparse cover of montane scrub. Where the valley begins to flatten out, riparian forest is bordered by a narrow fringe of secondary chipia, reduced almost to a very luxuriant scrub of shrubs and tall herbs. Montane forest can be vaguely differentiated into a moister submontane forest along the streams and a drier montane forest as a fringe. Some of the submontane and most of the montane forest is secondary, the latter varying from low forest to scrub. So that kind of sums up a good deal of what the vegetation is like, especially where he talks about the differentiation between submontane forest and montane forest there. Not very easy to see. There's no defining line. The montane forest he refers to as being generally a drier fringe along the edge of the submontane forest, where things tend to be taller and grow more luxuriantly, upwards of 20 to 25 or sometimes even 30-meter trees in that sense, versus in the montane forest where plants might only get to about 15 to 20, as he puts it. So we're going to kind of start today by just talking about the forest and the woodland of the Mafinga, and we will leave the montane scrub and the montane grassland for another video. So we camped in an area of the Mafingas called Mulungali Forest. It is a proper forest, closed canopy, quite dense, with the emergent species being quite tall, a lot of them being out of reach of being able to easily collect specimens unless you had leaves or fruits that had fallen. In some cases, actually, that was quite plentiful with things like Ficus burkii that had been dropping quite a lot of fruits as the birds were feasting, and then Landolphia as well, which was dropping fruits either being broken off by birds or monkeys, or just twigs and things like that snapping. You can see the massive strangler roots of the fig behind me, which are very impressive in and of themselves, considering that tree probably stands, 25 to 30 meters tall. So I found it really difficult to be able to differentiate where montane forest ends and submontane forest begins. There is no clear definition. And Fanshawe is saying a fringe doesn't really indicate anything beyond that idea of a fringe being something of a very narrow strip. However, there's not a heck of a lot of ground vegetation either in the forest or the submontane or the montane forest areas, with the exception of sparse amounts of some shade-loving grasses, Opsilomenis, although we did come across plants of Soromatum venosum in the Araceae family, as well as, to my surprise, Sciduxis in the Amaryllidaceae family. Unfortunately, we didn't come across any of those in flower, but just being able to see them in leaf is usually enough to at least identify what it is. The epiphytes within the forest areas were usually confined mostly to epiphytic ferns, Asplenium mannii, in some cases literally covered whole trunks, And we did actually come across some species of epiphytic orchids, Polystachya, one or two actually Polystachyias, if I remember correctly, and then Microcelia and another one that I have yet to identify. The main kind of ground flora with these things would have been ferns predominantly, and especially then as we got closer down to Mulungali stream, we started to get a lot richer flora of ferns there with Cyathea dredgei, Pisciania, Fraxinia, and a number of asplenium ferns. And a smattering of some flowering shrubs. There was a solanum species that we came across, Solanum schumaniana, and then also a Psychotria. I think it's Submontane or something like that, but I'll have to look in my notes again and see. But aside from that, not too many things flowering, or if they were, they weren't within easy eye shot for us to see. The undergrowth is pretty dense, it's very leafy. In a few places where the canopy has opened up, mainly just because a larger tree has fallen, you get this kind of explosion in growth of herbaceous plants and saplings. But on the whole, you know, the forest vegetation, as you see it when you're in there, is just solid green predominantly. Unlike something like the woodland area, which I must admit, miombo woodland is one of my favorite habitats in Zambia. It's also the most dominant across the country, but has regional differences depending on rainfall and soil type and all that kind of stuff. But I do find it one of the most satisfying to walk through and to collect in, just because of how variable it can be. But the vegetation then underneath is dominated by grasses and sedges, with then quite a few herbaceous species. Again, in the bean family, Fabaceae, and then a smattering of other things that you'd come across, especially with certain aster species as well. I shouldn't say aster species, Asteraceae species, sorry. And some rare things that you then definitely come across then too. Asclepius palustris was one that we came across, which I always love coming across any of the milkweed family. They're very interesting plants. And then we also came across another milkweed family member with Gomphocarpus praticola, which was lovely to see. I don't think I've seen flowers on a Asclepiad species that are that big, effectively. In terms of orchids, things that I tend to really enjoy, fairly sparse, but I don't know if that was the conditions of where we were or whether or not it's the time of year. You know, we were able to see Disa conatoides, subspecies consina, which was nice. I've seen it around Lusaka, but it's always nice to see, regardless of that. And then there was also Satyrium volkensii, which was another nice one to come across in the woodland section. And you know, the petaloid monocots are usually my greatest interest, in things in the Chlorophytum family, which we came across a number of species. The Iridaceae family, again, coming across things like Aristia was really nice in the woodland. And actually, we came across Dietes iridoides in the riverines, or the riparian forest, which was also lovely to see. But on the whole, you know, the flowers of the miombo, there's usually much more to see, and there's usually much more to enjoy during the walk. It's an easier walk. You know, you don't have to battle through the undergrowth too much. The one thing I would say is the slope was not always an easy one to walk, even in the upland miombo, where in areas, as it crests, as Fanshawe mentions, that, it can reach up to the ridges and crests of some of these areas within the mountains. It does make for some difficult maneuvering to get up to them or to get around and see as much as you would like to see effectively. However, I'm not going to complain. We came across a lot of interesting and amazing things, even a few epiphytes in the woodland with Bulbophyllum rugosibulbum and Citorchis crassifolius, growing up to, in some areas, almost 2,000 meters up. We did find evidence of people burning and utilizing the woodlands for personal means, in terms of especially apiculture, people cutting down trees and then using the trunk as an actual beehive. But on the whole, these areas, because of the difficulty in getting up there, generally remain untouched, which is still lovely. In terms of the riparian forest, the stream that we came across in Mulungali forest was very dark, just because the cover of the vegetation surrounding it essentially closed in above it and created conditions that were very different than from riparian forests that we came across in the woodland sections. In the riparian forests, depending on location of where you were, depending on the light levels that still reached them, you would get then a different flora of both ferns, terrestrial as well as epiphytic or lithophytic, and other herbaceous perennials, one of which, Begonia sutherlandii, subspecies latior, was something that I've known grows in Zambia, but I was, up until that point, I had not seen it. And to be there and seeing it in flower was just absolutely fantastic. The orange color of the flowers was definitely not disappointing, to the extent that it made also seeing Begonia princei a slightly less exciting experience. I've seen Begonia princei around Zambia before, but this was the first time to see this particular Begonia sutherlandii, sorry. And then also in the same location, coming across a Streptocarpus species, which I knew was there based on the previous report that was done following the trip in 2018. But unfortunately, it was not in flower, so it remains a mystery for me as to which species it is at the moment. There are much more streams to see, there are much more forested areas to see, there's much more woodland to see, something that can't be easily completed in the space of a 4 or 5 day trip into site. So, I really look forward to being able to get back and being able to check out more areas and different areas of the Mafingas, and to kind of push the ability to explore more effectively. In the next video, we're going to talk about the montane grassland and montane scrub areas. We passed through them quite a bit, as well as having a full day kind of dedicated to climbing up through the montane grassland and scrub to the top of one of the crests in the mountains. So we'll kind of highlight the things that we saw there and just talk about it a little bit more briefly. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you're so inclined, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.